about the welfare of the country or the people. We've established that through ongoing operations. They're really concerned about their hold on power and their ability to leverage it. And so if he erases all of their military power or he goes in after things like the electricity grid, then they no longer have the reins of power. They can no longer exert a pressure on their populations. So they're both saying, we want a way out of this, but we think the way out is to make the other one bend the knee economically.
And who has the top there? Because Iran also strategically is not willing to let go of control of the Strait, it seems. Although there's that conversation between Iran and Oman, it's unclear whether that conversation is truly going to be fruitful, especially for other U.S. allies in the region who allegedly called the president asking for him to not attack Iran again this time around over the weekend. So where does that stand? Does Iran basically have hostage of U.S. allies right now with the Strait?
Not necessarily hostage. Remember, it's not necessarily in the U.S. disinterest, if you're the administration, to have them call and make that request. Because being able to say you backed off of a military operation to buy time for a deal gives you more time when that economic squeeze is taking place, is exerting, its impact on the Iranian economy.
Makes you look diplomatic.
Makes you look diplomatic. Well, now he is. He's saying, we're open to this deal. We want the negotiations to happen this afternoon. Is Iran willing to do it? So it puts them in that seat where they're now under international pressure to continue those talks, because if they decide not to, the U.S. can say we were pushed to this military decision because they would not make a deal and they were continuing to suffocate the international economy with their insistence on controlling the Strait.
How are you seeing the issue of the Strait right now, Alan, where you have Iran denying it was negotiating, as Trump is really trying to say, yes, they're spending hours negotiating, but Iran saying they're in talks with Oman to establish a safe temporary route for vessels through the Strait. And then you see Saudi Arabia looking for workarounds also to deal with the Houthis. How are you seeing this?
Well, I think in this case, Iran is to be believed. They've realized that it makes no sense to negotiate with the U.S. because the U.S., in their mind, can't be counted on to deliver.
Join XM Competition. Trade to win your share of $25,000 in withdrawable cash prizes every week. Sign up, verify your account, and you're in. Trade with virtual funds for a full week. The top 100 traders walk away with a cash prize. It's that easy. Open an account to join the Demo Weekly competition today.
See how the Omanis play out in these negotiations with Iran over the Strait. The only issue, is getting the Strait open as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Because as Kirsten said, I agree 100%, it's a two clocks issue. Pressure on Iranian ports, pressure on the Strait of Hormuz. Unfortunately, this is the one where the alarm's going to go off first. Pressure on the Strait.
President Trump with a new warning for Iran today, an ultimatum as he insists new peace talks are ongoing. Over the weekend, President Trump says he called off a massive attack at the request of Iran and allies in the Middle East, and that his decision was contingent on a proposed deal with Tehran being quickly agreed to. But today, the president made clear his patience is running thin, especially when it comes to the flow of oil export in the Strait of Hormuz.
This is the last chance. This is not something that, if it doesn't happen, this is the last chance for them to sign a good document. I'm not going to let them charge. If anybody's going to charge, we'll charge. We're the one that has total control. We have total control. We have a thing called a blockade with his Navy. And that Navy is, they call it a wall of steel, the United States wall of steel. And no, there's not going to be charging. We're not talking about charging at all. There won't be charging.
The president's announcement of new talks with Iran has oil prices sinking today, despite no indication that Iran was prepared to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Here with me now, the managing director of Clearview Energy Partners, Kevin Book. And Kevin, how is the oil industry viewing this plan by Iran and Oman to establish this safe, temporary route, as they're calling it, for vessels through the Strait?
Well, I think most operators in the region and those who work in the region, U.S. companies, foreign companies, don't want to pay more to travel through what would ordinarily be known as innocent passage, through territorial waters adjacent to the countries that are proposing to charge fees. That would be a big change. They don't want to do it.
Okay, and then President Trump announcing plans to pause attacks on Iran. We see oil prices tumble 5%, 20%. Why does the oil market continue to believe that Trump who CNN's David Goldman calls the president who cried peace. Why does the oil market continue to react the way it does?
Well, there's a very important role that he plays in deciding whether or not there's going to be an attack. So we have very little information coming out of a war zone. The fog of war is thick. There's a lot of mystery. And so you can track ships, you can look at fundamentals, but a very significant change of the order that the president had been discussing, the biggest attack since World War II, could very easily disable a lot of capacity in the region. Reprisals could disable a lot of capacity. If he says it's off, the market sells off until it learns something else.
So does it react more so on words than action or inaction?
Well, fundamentals matter. There's a lot going on besides what the president says. So oil that doesn't come out of the Strait of Hormuz is a shortage, and that shortage drives up prices. But there's another shortage, a bigger shortage, a shortage of refined products, fuels, gasoline, diesel, the fuel we use. Now, one of the things that's happening is that the oil price isn't going up as much because the refineries that can't get the oil aren't using it. The fuels prices are going up more as a result. You see a divergence in these prices. So there's different prices that are responding in different ways. But look, we're not getting the volume out of the Strait of Hormuz that we were getting before the war. We're not getting the volume we were getting during the MOU days, which means that we're coming back on that moment when inventories are drawing and questions are arising.
Well, despite not having that volume coming out of the Strait, prices, the profits for oil companies is something that the president actually talked about just today, not long ago in the Oval Office. What did you make of those comments?
Well, it's been a recurrent theme. Secretary Bessent brought it up in April and said that, oil prices are falling, the gasoline and fuel prices should fall too. In June, the president said he wanted to see lower prices. He said it again today. The reality is that the industry isn't causing these prices to go up. Shortage is causing these prices to go up. That is what, in fact, the president said today. And so it is war that is behind this. Now, as for what goes on in the retail, there has never been any evidence found of systematic manipulation of prices at a retail level. And refineries are effectively price takers. And so they're buying crude oil at the global price and selling at sort of the commodity price of the fuels that they produce. So it's very difficult to understand how they could respond to this. But one of the things that they have been watching, that investors have been watching, is whether or not the administration would look at limiting exports, limiting the outflow of fuels from the United States to try to force those prices down. They have said that they wouldn't do that. They said that earlier this year. But as we go further into the summer with high prices, those questions are likely to come up again, Brian.
And we also have the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen warning they would target Saudi shipping in the Red Sea. So this has moved beyond just the Strait. What are the impacts there of a potential blockade?
Well, that's the exit valve for a lot of the crude that had been previously going through the Strait of Hormuz. So if the Houthis actually block cargoes going through the Red Sea, through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait that goes into the Gulf of Aden at the bottom of the Red Sea, then those cargoes at minimum have to go north through Suez. They have to offload, if they're large tankers, to the Sumed pipeline, which has pipeline capacity constraints of its own. And then they have to take the route all the way around Africa to get to the Asian markets they previously would have served in relatively short order through Bab el-Mandeb. So that's a pretty significant change if it happens. And
also in the Oval Office today, President Trump seemed to be irked by the profits of some of the oil companies. What did you make of those comments?
Well, it's consistent with what he'd been saying again in June and what the Secretary of the Treasury had been saying in April. The profits coincide with shortage. Oil companies don't usually get a lot of sympathy when they're experiencing significant losses at times of surplus. We as consumers tend to be pretty happy in those times, and we're not out there to complain about that. So it's cyclical. They make investments over the long haul. Prices go up and down, and their profits reflect that.
A CNN exclusive. Sources say the Pentagon is asking U.S. troops for creative and unconventional ideas to punish Iran, essentially crowdsourcing new ways to wage the war President Trump launched now in its 6th month. CNN's Zach Cohen helped break this story and is here now with details. So, Zach, what are you learning about this?
Yeah, sources telling me and our colleague Katie Bo-Lillis that the Pentagon is really trying to cast a wider net as it seeks fresh ideas for how to ramp up the pressure on Iran at this stage in the conflict, which we're told by multiple sources is not inherently a bad idea. This war was stated to only last about 6 weeks, and we're now in the 6th month of the war itself, which has really changed the calculus as far as military planners are concerned. We're told that the U.S. Central Command is really taking a look at its strategy as a whole and trying to reevaluate what it can do to try to push Iran to the negotiating table. And our sources are also saying there that this email, this crowdsourcing email, is a sign of the limited options that President Donald Trump has available to him at this point to try to get Iran to the table on his terms. And that's something that we've seen play out over the course of this conflict, whether it's concerns about the diminishing U.S. munitions stockpile, the fact that even Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, has acknowledged that airstrikes, air power, have their limitations. So these stated objectives that President Trump has laid out since the beginning of the conflict, preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and even reopening the Strait of Hormuz, has proven more challenging to accomplish with just military might alone. And we're seeing even now Donald Trump giving the Iranians one more chance to make some sort of an initial agreement over the Strait of Hormuz. But in the meantime, we do see military planners really trying to broaden the scope and solicit creative and unconventional ideas for how they can maybe handle the situation going forward.
Certainly an intriguing peek behind the curtain. Obviously, we've reached out to the military on this reporting. What are we hearing? We reached out to U.S. Central Command about this reporting, and they responded saying, quote, U.S. Central Command has a long history of thinking and working in innovative ways. Admiral Cooper, who runs U.S. Central Command in particular, reaches out to members of our great team, regardless of rank, to achieve the highest levels of operational performance possible. And I want to note, too, that this email was sent just days before President Trump threatened to escalate the conflict.
Earnings season is here. Get ready for the biggest announcements that are about to shape the market. Trade the move with Plus 500's CFDs.
Not just by the senior leaders in the military, but also lower ranks as well.
Tonight, President Trump says he is giving Iran one last chance to sign a deal at the request of America's Gulf.